So we're lucky to have Kirk Smith, who's the co-chair of the Open Process Automation Forum and part of the Federal and Industrial Solutions Group at Intel, to talk about how FDO fits in with some other standards in the space, such as OPAS. So please, Kirk, take it away, please.
Thank you, Megan, very much. Can you hear me fine?
You're good. Yep.
Okay. So, folks, look, there's a huge transformation going on today. And I want to talk a little bit about the Open Process Automation Forum, which sits under the Open Group. And the Open Group hosts forums such as OSDU, OFP, real-time FACE, right, for the aeronautics industry, and many other forums. But their general thrust is digital transformation at large, basically. So, folks recognize that a lot of the systems of today need to go through this digital transformation where more and better information is required as we work through the proprietary systems that exist today. So the ecosystem is suffering from the ability to have access to all sorts of data, to move forward and be competitive, insert new technology, and change at the speed of business today. So whether you need to add new sensors to your system, want to add an application from a vendor that you don't typically work with outside of your proprietary ecosystem today, whether you want to use more off-the-shelf compute platforms, whatever the need is, today's systems need to be open. And that's whether you're doing predictive maintenance or edge analytics or have autonomous operations, all within the mindset of reducing the total cost of ownership. So, today we do acknowledge that many applications are locked to those platforms through proprietary interfaces, and the compute platform is locked to the underlying instrumentation. And the effort to move from one implementation to the other is prohibitively high in many cases. So what's the motivation for the OPAS standard? So these will resonate to you from an onboarding and provisioning viewpoint as we think about that standardization topic in the industry. So we just put 4 of these. They're some of the main ones. There's many, many more, as you can imagine. But an end user will want to move their applications from one hardware platform to another. They don't want to have to rewrite the applications. Today, in many cases, they actually do. A supplier may want to compete to supply software to hardware to all end users without spending effort to customize to a specific proprietary system. As an end user, there's a need to upgrade an existing control device to add a new control strategy and applications without interrupting operations. With a device from another supplier. So they really want this multi-vendor open ecosystem at an infrastructure and application level to meet their competitive needs in the future. So another example is I want to compete for systems integration opportunities across new projects and not be tied to legacy systems. So I think with almost every one of these, you could say, well, I understand how onboarding and provisioning would be needed at scale across the life cycle of a system in the industry. So that's one of the reasons I'm here today. I think there's a very interesting collaboration going on between the OPC Foundation, the FIDO Alliance, and the Open Group's Open Process Automation Forum. So what is the Open Group's Open Process Automation really focused on? So, in reducing the cost of the control system, reducing that cost to upgrade and replace, as I mentioned earlier, increase that value generation by removing the barriers to technology insertion and designing for an adaptable cybersecurity position. So, as you can see on the left-hand side, the standard ISO 95 and/or Purdue model variants that you can see across level 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then up to 5, which folks refer to in the supply chain space. You see that our scope is really focused at that level 1 to level 3 space where the traditional distributed control system operates today. Today, we have not taken on safety systems, although we believe that's at some point in the future will be important to address. We haven't taken on the HMI ecosystem yet. And you could probably add the storage ecosystem behind this, although it is embedded within the standard DCS space as well. So our vision is to create open standards, have them be interoperable, secure at security level 2. And on the right-hand side, lower right, you see a simplified architecture. The horizontal bar does not represent one service bus. It could be we do see level 1 and level 2 kind of collapsing. Some people see level 2 and level 3 collapsing depending on the industry vertical that you're in. We've started off in continuous, primarily in batch. We also see implementations in the discrete markets as well in the assembly space. So the standards that we've selected are standards that already exist. We only want to create a standard if a standard does not exist, if it doesn't help us get to that vision of having an interoperable, portable ecosystem for the industry. So, here you see virtualization alluded to, the transition over to the enterprise IT data centers, the access externally to the OT data centers through the various firewalls, and then the connectivity with OPAS conformant devices on the south side of the horizontal service bus, and then the recognition that non-OPAS conformant components also can connect to a conformant system by adding software connectivity modules that we'll talk about will be able to be certified in the future. So we often refer to this extreme edge as the distributed control node space. You'll hear people talk about edge server nodes. They're probably referring to a server class device at level 2 or 3 in most cases, but not always. And you'll see OPAS represent this and refer to this as an advanced computing platform, which just really is a larger server as we seek to continue to enable off-the-shelf adaptation in the industry for these technologies. You see the standards in the middle, whether it's 1131 or 1499 or the 61850 standards or the 6443, and I can read all the numbers, but OPC-UA, the function block standards, everything that's required to do the connectivity in the industry. We are covering many bases, which I'll talk about in a moment. So our current release is version 2.1. But before I get into that, to a little bit of that detail, just know that the industry organization is about 100 members across users and suppliers, OEMs, ODMs. We are leveraging our success in other industries, like we see with the FACE Consortium and avionics. We are focused on real-time virtualization and software-defined networking, as well as leveraging what's been done in the telecommunications space. And you can see the standards that we've adapted down below and are adopting specific ones to support our certification longer term. And I can tell you today that I have good news, and that the FIDO Alliance is in the process of establishing a liaison with the Open Process Automation Forum and the Open Group. So that's a real positive as we passed our first hurdle to get FDO into this standard, along with OPC-UA Part 21 to address onboarding and provisioning. But the OPAS standard covers much more than just some of the things I've mentioned. We are covering security. We do have the connectivity framework based on OPC-UA. We are adopting the system management DMTF Redfish interfaces that DMTF puts out. This is to replace the legacy IPMI that's been typically used at those layers. And it's really comforting to know that folks like Dell and HP already have servers that support that interface in the market today. At the information exchange models level, this is probably where some of the most transformational changes is happening as we work to take OPC-UA and the automation ML standards along with ISA 18.2 and combine that with how we would integrate with 1131-3, which is the classic function blocks you see in many systems today, along with the new 61499 standard, which can run 1131 and host a more distributed interface model for the heterogeneous ecosystem it supports. So in part 7, we do support physical platform. We have one specific architectural implementation calling out 1588 for PTP. And We have seven, I believe 6 or 7 more variants of this we're introducing with 3.0 to support better physical connectivity in the physical interfaces for devices that need to be standardized and exchanged at the edge. So you will see version 3.0 introduce orchestration informatively and application portability informatively. When we move to normative, of course, is when you'll have the certification requirements that are required. And then shortly after that, we envision being able to introduce onboarding and provisioning. As I said, we passed our maturity level 0 milestone a few weeks ago, and we're in the process of putting the logistics in place to work this in detail across the forum, and leverage what the FDO Alliance has already put in place, leverage the certification already put in place with FDO today, and the same thing with the OPC UA Part 21. And I'll talk more about how those interact here in a moment and why we think they're important together. Okay, so just real quick with the one of the things that makes the open process automation forum special is that not only do we have a good breadth of membership, and we have hardware and software suppliers, and we have major distributed control system vendors who recognize the transformation that's underway and want to help participate in the transformation. We have a healthy amount of end user collaboration partners, the folks that will consume the standard and who help with the use cases and usages up front that are defined to be successful. We also have 7 announced development test beds, and you can see the collaboration partners in the lower right-hand corner. And those are in various stages of development. Probably ExxonMobil is probably the most advanced at this point. There are field trials underway today with plans for deployment in the next 1 to 2 years, depending on which one of these that you do look at. So you can see the who's who in the membership in the upper right-hand corner. So we think our key to success is having both the end users and the OEM community, ODM community present is one of our keys to success to date. So the standard with version 2.1, version 2.2 will be coming out with some errata corrections in connectivity and a few systems management areas as the validation proceeds. But this is really the first version that really allows you to begin certifying products. So to do that, we do hold interoperability workshops that allow for testing of a supplier's technologies in a very safe environment. And we use the end user test beds to help establish the overall product demand, help shape some of the interoperability workshops from some of the early findings. And then, of course, that flows into a certification confidence in the test cases and test purposes that the certification team works to define to help lift all boats in the industry. So on the right-hand side, you just see how we support a multi-vendor marketplace. Whether it's, there'll be different types of distributed control nodes, as I mentioned earlier, and the profiles will define the variants that will be brought in for certification at an interface level. Don't forget that we don't ask anybody to expose their IP. This is just about interface validation for interoperability and portability. So our industry voices do drive the OPAS standard. One of the key things with our maturity level process is we start with user stories, we mature them into use cases, those develop into requirements which go into writing the standard, and the end users sign off on these, the people who are going to buy the products in the industry. We believe that's very important. As in some standards bodies, you might see some of this get developed and then go with a feedback loop that's much longer. We think this helps us be successful longer term. So let's talk a little about the IT/OT onboarding and provisioning ecosystem. If you look at continuous processing, if you look at batch processing, if you look at discrete markets in general, you'll see a mix of onboarding today. And you may have some parts of an enterprise that an end user company owns where they may have very, very rudimentary onboarding and provisioning, may not be using FDO, may not be even leveraging OPC UA Part 21, which is really relatively new in the marketplace, I would say. and you may have some places where, they have a dedicated solution model. Maybe they picked one. And then we think that there's a third kind of class of devices where you kind of have a mixed device model where the coexistence of multiple methods, would need to exist. So I think as this matures across anyone's business, they'll have to deal with this fragmentation and disparity for the next several years. And I think FDO and the adoption of OPC UA Part 21 in some of the OT environments, FDO, definitely covering the broader supply chain and OT as well, and IT. Having these work together in this ecosystem, I think is a win-win for the industry. And so just recognize that's the hill to climb. And I think that it's a very positive outcome. So in the past, I would say what? In the past, I'd say the past 8 to 12 months, the OPC Foundation and the FIDO Alliance have been working together to understand each other's solutions. And they actually have a proposal that's being worked to understand when one system is being used or the other and allow you to bootstrap each other. So we think that's critically important. So if you're building up a device, whether it's a bare metal device, whether it's a containerized, a virtual machine-based device, classical just OS implementation, all those 3 or 4 or 5 different device types that we see in a common IoT implementation, as they become very, very common in many of the edge automation systems today. Having OPC UA Part 21 executions be able to recognize at what point FDO needs to take over, and vice versa, having FDO recognize when OPC UA Part 21 might be handling the control application, let's say, in the deployment of the app potentially, and being able to pass over control is a very, very important thing. So, and this is my last slide. I'm happy to take questions, but this is just a picture. These are taken from both of the standards that are available on the internet today. I didn't want to grab anything that was not public. And so, on the left-hand side, you can see the FIDO Alliance workflow for the TO2 protocol as an example. And on the right-hand side, you can see the alternate authentication models with pool management, and figure 8 is represented in one of the OPC Foundation's onboarding documents. But, basically is the FDO device and the SDO owner, perform their key exchange. You can see how the trust transfer, hops across the top from the authentication service to the registrar, to the certificate manager, and then, down below in the OPC Foundation model, in that case, you would actually see where it would pick up and finish the signing request and move forward. And so it's just an example of what's developing. I think this will appear in a future addendum to the specifications on both sides, and we think that's a positive outcome for the industry. So at this point, I'll stop. We'll take any questions, and you're welcome to have any discussion as needed.
Thank you so much, Kirk. So if anyone has any questions, it's a good time to pop them into the Q&A widget. We do have a couple minutes. We could ask Kirk a few questions. I do love the approach of, not creating standards where standards aren't needed. That's the FIDO Alliance. We take the same approach, right? That's part of the reason why we have FDO, is that there was a gap in the market that we saw ourselves able to fill. And Intel, submitted the specs to the FIDO Alliance in order to, standardize that. So I think that's a really wise way to approach things, especially in such in an area that's sort of almost overrun with different approaches and specifications almost at this point. Could you go into a little more around so I know it's a consortium, and what the processes by which, if you go back to the standards slide, I know you didn't want to name all of them. I'm not going to ask you to either. But the process by which it's sort of decided, what the go-to standard is going to be for a specific part of the process.
Sure. I mean, all that's required is for a member to develop what's called a feature set proposal, and they take it to the business working group where a group of end users and other business-oriented professionals sit. And, the first thing you want to do is get the end user community involved, right, in the process. And that's what we call maturity level 0. And FDO passed that about 4 weeks ago, I think, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. Richard Kirslick and I have been discussing how that matures. But then it goes in through, the draft development. And so what we will do is we would say, well, how does the FDO standard, how does it impact security at IEC 6443 at security level 2, which is where we currently are at? How is OPCUA 6541 impacted as an information model interface for interoperability between applications? And I think they've addressed that already with how to pick that up and handshake with whatever's there. But one of the things that we probably haven't discussed in depth yet, which is a follow-on step, is how does something like DMTF redfish, does it need to be? Is there any data here that FDO needs, for example, that we need to make sure that's written as an addendum somewhere or not? So we want to ask all those questions so that the folks building these systems, will have a clear understanding of how to apply FDO in this space. And then you've got, the automation ML is right now targeted for like exporting out of the builder tools that most distributed control system vendors have for putting together control applications, for example, usually drag and drop type implementations. But the standard there to export those configurations is through automation ML. So, maybe there's not much to worry about here, but maybe we do need to have hooks for FDO that we need to reference in those XML-based signatures as part of that configuration that ideally gets imported into a control system, right, to drive its configuration. And then the 1131 and 61499 function block ecosystem, we would ask the same questions from an FDO perspective. What information would need to, if you're going to onboard a runtime from one of these, right? The FDO's got a placeholder to specify what needs to be downloaded. And so in most cases, I think FDO standards likely already cover these scenarios, but there could be some case that it doesn't. And our process is just about checking all of those intercept points with the existing standard to make sure that if there's something else that we need to either have the FIDO Alliance help bring into realization, like they're doing with this bootstrapping of Part 21 where it's needed, and vice versa, or other things. So hopefully that
does. Thank you, Kirk. And it's just sort of a peek into how some of these things come to fruition, and that, kind of,
right.
Not to use the hokey term, it takes a village, but it's not all the work has to happen in one particular place, like the FIDO Alliance or OPAF, for example.
And then after we're all satisfied with that, then we just check, what would we have to test? Is it just an attestation at some level? Is there an actual physical test that we need people to run to make sure some interface works correctly, or not, right? And it could be as simple as just checking off a checkbox that yes, we adhere to the standard, or it could be that I actually want to do a physical test, and here's the test script, and we're going to actually make the certification adhere to that level, so we have interoperability and portability over the life cycle of a system. So those decisions have to be made, and then the Open Group has its own review and release process to formally manage the documents like everybody does. But just that said, one of the things we're trying to get away from is having everything be in series, and we're working to we put this maturity level process together so that we can be more agile. So, if we go through these checks and we find that FDO is good as is, then we likely can release it much earlier than waiting until some longer process to occur. So myself and Richard Kirslick and others, Jeffrey Cooper, will work through how fast we can move here and try to release it as early as possible. A lot of times it comes down to resourcing, as you know. There's only so many people.
Of course. day job versus contributing to standards orgs.
That's right.
Well, thank you so much for this, Kirk. And the audience thanks you as well. And have a great day.